I wasn't looking for Tartaria when I found the dark day of 1780, May 19th to be exact, when the sky went black across New England and parts of eastern Canada. Not dark, not cloudy, black. That single day opened a door I didn't know existed. Picture this. Farmers working their fields at midday suddenly plunged into darkness so complete they couldn't see their own hands. Women lighting oil lamps at noon as if preparing for evening prayers. Animals behaving as though dusk had arrived 6 hours early, retreating to shelter despite the sun's scheduled position high overhead. The Connecticut state legislature faced a choice that day: adjourn the session because representatives literally couldn't make out faces 3 feet away, or continue blind. They chose to stop. Think about that for a moment. Government officials in the middle of conducting state business, forced to halt because visibility dropped to zero during what should have been the brightest hours of the day. Now, if you ask conventional historians what caused this phenomenon, they'll give you a tidy answer: wildfires. Smoke drifting from burning forests, carried by peculiar wind patterns, temporarily obscuring the sun across several hundred miles. Clean, simple, case closed. And for the vast majority of people who hear this story, that explanation works just fine. They move on. The dark day becomes a footnote, a curiosity, nothing more. But I couldn't move on. Something about the official story felt incomplete, like a puzzle with pieces forced into the wrong spaces. So I started digging into first-hand accounts, reading letters and journals from people who actually experienced that day. And the more primary sources I examined, the more the wildfire explanation began to disintegrate under scrutiny. Here's what made me suspicious. This wasn't an isolated incident limited to New England. During the same narrow window of years, 1780, 1784, reports emerged from across the globe describing similar atmospheric disturbances: skies turning crimson in Europe, ash falling from cloudless horizons in Russia, blood-colored moons hanging over Asia, all of this happening within a compressed time frame. And here's where it gets interesting. These atmospheric anomalies align almost perfectly with something else that was happening: the systematic removal of a name from the world's maps. That name, Tartaria. Before we go further, let me address the standard explanation one more time because it's important to understand exactly where it fails. According to official records, forest fires in pre-industrial North America occasionally produced enough smoke to temporarily darken regional skies. The smoke would accumulate, linger for hours or even a full day, then dissipate as wind patterns shifted. Unusual, certainly, but entirely within the realm of natural phenomena. Nothing mysterious, nothing requiring deeper investigation. Except the eyewitness descriptions don't match that scenario. Timothy Dwight, who would later become president of Yale University, documented the event in detail. He described the darkness as arriving with shocking abruptness, not gradually building as smoke accumulated, but appearing suddenly, like someone drawing a massive curtain across the entire sky in a single motion. One moment normal daylight, the next moment complete blackness. That's not how smoke from distant fires behaves. Smoke builds gradually. You watch the sky change incrementally over hours. But this was instantaneous transition. Then there's the color. Multiple independent witnesses described a strange copper or brass-colored tinge at the boundaries where the blackness met what little light remained. When the moon finally rose that evening, people reported it appearing deep red, almost blood-like in hue, visible through the murky atmosphere. I've personally witnessed wildfire smoke. I've stood under skies turned orange and brown by burning forests, watched ash drift down like snowflakes. The color profile is completely different. Wildfire smoke creates orange and gray tones. It doesn't produce the brassy, metallic hues described in 1780 accounts. Samuel Williams, a Harvard professor at the time, attempted to calculate the geographical area affected by the darkness. His estimate? Over 150,000 square miles. Read that again. 150,000 square miles of terrain plunged into midday darkness. That's not a fire. That's not even a series of fires. That's something operating on a completely different scale, something that demands a different explanation. So why did forest fires become the official answer? And why, when I started pulling on this particular thread, did I discover that 1780 sits at the exact center of a web of other historical impossibilities? Watch what happens when you map out the timeline. In 1776, the American colonies declare independence, a new nation emerging, requiring new narratives, new maps, new official histories to legitimize its existence. 4 years later, in 1780, the sky goes black. and here's the detail that mainstream history tends to gloss over. 1780 marks a critical turning point in the field of cartography. Maps begin changing, but not in the way they normally evolve. Maps typically update gradually. Explorers return with new information. Surveyors correct old boundaries. Borders shift due to wars or treaties. These changes are documented, explained, traceable, but something different happens around 1780. The word Tartary starts vanishing from maps. Not quickly, not in an obvious purge, but systematically, deliberately, across publishing houses in different countries that theoretically had no reason to coordinate such an effort. Tartary, or Tartaria, depending on which European language you're examining, had appeared on maps for centuries. Medieval cartographers labeled vast swaths of Central and Northern Asia with this designation. The name persisted through the Age of Exploration. It survived the scientific revolution. It endured through the Enlightenment. You can find it on Dutch maps, French maps, British maps, Russian maps, all the way up to the late 1700s. Then, in the decades immediately following 1780, it begins disappearing. By 1820, the name has become rare. By 1850, it's virtually extinct, erased, replaced with what, you ask, with more accurate designations, according to official sources, the Russian Empire, the Qing dynasty, various khanates and tribal territories across Central Asia, all perfectly reasonable labels for those regions. But here's where the official explanation collapses. This isn't how cartographic knowledge functioned in the 18th century. Mapmakers were meticulous. They cited their sources. They documented corrections. They explained why old information was being replaced with new data. When a significant change was made, especially the removal of a name that had been standard for hundreds of years, there would be notation, explanation, scholarly discussion, but for Tartary, nothing. The name simply fades away as if it had never been important, as if centuries of cartographers had all been using a placeholder term they always knew was temporary. If you've heard whispers about Tartaria before finding this video, drop a comment and tell me what first caught your attention. If this is your first encounter with this topic, I want to know that too, because what I'm about to show you goes much deeper than most people realize. Following the Dark Day, following the erasure of Tartary from global maps, we enter what I call the inheritance period, roughly 1780 to 1850. This is when the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence. During these 70 years, massive buildings begin appearing across the world. Not just large buildings, but architecturally sophisticated structures displaying suspiciously similar design elements despite supposedly being constructed by completely separate cultures with minimal communication. The official term for this phenomenon is neoclassical revival, a return to Greek and Roman architectural principles that allegedly spread from Europe to the Americas, to Russia, to parts of Asia, all within a few short decades. But what if these buildings didn't spread? What if they didn't just appear? What if they were already there waiting to be claimed? Consider some specific examples. How did San Francisco, barely recovered from the chaos of the gold rush, construct world-class Beaux-Arts palaces? How did Melbourne, functioning as a remote colonial outpost, build exhibition halls rivaling European cathedrals in scale and craftsmanship? How did Chicago erect an entire exposition city, hundreds of elaborate buildings in just 2 years using 19th century construction technology? The standard answers are predictable: industrial progress, colonial ambition, human ingenuity. But accepting these answers requires ignoring some deeply uncomfortable facts. There are virtually no comprehensive records documenting the actual construction processes for most of these buildings. We have photographs of finished structures. We have dedication ceremonies and opening events. What we don't have are photographs of the building process itself. No documentation of the labor forces required, and we're talking about workforces that would have numbered in the thousands for projects of this magnitude. No supply chain records explaining how millions of tons of stone, marble, and metal were quarried, transported, and assembled. No contemporary newspaper accounts expressing amazement at the speed of construction or questioning how such feats were accomplished with available technology. Instead, what exists in the historical record are dedication plaques, official opening ceremonies, and histories written decades after the supposed construction, all telling remarkably similar stories. This magnificent building represents the triumph of insert nation, empire, built by insert vague description of unnamed workers, completed on schedule despite all obstacles. The narrative uniformity is striking, and it suggests something other than construction. It suggests inheritance. It suggests that these structures weren't built in the 1800s, they were already standing. The plaques, the official histories, the dedication ceremonies, all of it was reattribution, a new civilization claiming the infrastructure of an old one. Have you noticed these architectural patterns in your own city? If so, leave a comment describing what you've found, and make sure you're subscribed, because this investigation continues and you won't want to miss what comes next. Let me propose an alternative chronology, a timeline that actually makes sense of all these disconnected anomalies. Pre-1780, a global or near-global civilization exists. Call it Tartaria, call it whatever name they used for themselves. Advanced enough to construct the classical architecture we see distributed worldwide. Extensive enough to appear on every major map produced in every major cartographic center. Organized enough to maintain infrastructure across multiple continents simultaneously. 1785 catastrophic collapse. The cause, internal warfare, natural disaster, something else entirely, doesn't matter as much as the scale. Destruction massive enough to produce global atmospheric effects. The population is killed, displaced, scattered, but the infrastructure, the buildings, they remain standing. 1785-1820, the inheritance period. Surviving populations, or perhaps entirely new populations, Russian territorial expansion, European colonial movements, American westward migration, Chinese consolidation move into empty cities, they claim existing buildings, they create foundation myths. We built this in record time with primitive tools becomes the standard narrative, repeated across cultures. 1820-1900, historical revision accelerates. Encyclopedias are rewritten. Maps are redrawn. Academic consensus is manufactured. Tartaria transforms from a civilization into merely a geographic term, something vague, something unimportant, something not worth investigating. The architectural inheritance becomes evidence of rapid industrial progress rather than continuity with a previous culture. 1900 present, the narrative solidifies into concrete. Anyone who questions it gets marginalized. The fundamental problem, how did nearly identical architecture appear simultaneously across supposedly disconnected cultures, is simply ignored. The missing construction documentation is never seriously investigated. The abrupt historical transitions are never examined with proper scrutiny. And the dark day? Just a curious atmospheric event. Forest fires. Nothing to see here. Move along. Except this explanation accounts for too much to dismiss. It explains the timeline. It explains the architecture. It explains the silence. It explains the impossible coordination. It explains why adequate construction records don't exist, because construction never happened. The buildings were discovered, not built. It explains the stylistic uniformity across supposedly separate cultures because they all inherited from the same architectural source. It explains the rush to attribute, to claim, to establish official narratives as quickly as possible, because empty cities belong to whoever can assert ownership most convincingly. And it explains the dark day itself, not as random smoke from random fires, but as the last visible evidence of a civilization's final hours, the atmospheric signature of annihilation. The sky went black because a world was ending, and when the smoke finally cleared, survivors were told the cities had always belonged to them. Which brings us back to May 19, 1780, the day the sky turned black. Not just over New England. Reports from Europe, Russia, and the Far East describe similar phenomena clustered around this same time frame. In 1783, the Laki fissure erupts in Iceland, creating what climate scientists call dry fog across Europe. Then comes the Great Frost of 1783, widespread crop failures in 1784. Strange atmospheric phenomena continuing into 1785 and 1786. Blood-colored moons, unseasonable cold, unusual weather patterns. The official explanation fractures into multiple separate natural disasters. Forest fires here, volcanic eruptions there, random weather anomalies everywhere else, all coincidentally compressed into a 5-year window. But what if it wasn't multiple events? What if the dark day wasn't smoke from forest fires, but atmospheric debris from something far larger? What if the dry fog wasn't just volcanic ash, but particulate matter from widespread destruction? What if the years without proper summer weren't climate aberrations but the aftermath of catastrophe? Not a single volcano, not random fires, but a civilization-ending cataclysm. The kind of event that would explain why Tartaria vanishes from maps after 1780. The kind of event that would leave behind empty cities ready for new inhabitants. The kind of event that would necessitate a completely new historical narrative to explain the sudden architectural inheritance. Here's the most disturbing part. If Tartaria was a major civilization, if these buildings were constructed by a culture spanning continents, where did the people go? Not gradually through slow decline and absorption, but abruptly, completely, within a single generation. Maps from 1770 clearly show Tartary. Maps from 1820 show Russia, China, European colonial possessions. The transition happens in roughly 50 years, no major wars documented, no massive migration recorded, no contemporary accounts of refugees, cultural integration, conquest and absorption. Just replacement, complete replacement. Think about what that requires. The total destruction or displacement of a population large enough to build and maintain global infrastructure, the erasure of their language, their records, their cultural memory, the reattribution of their architecture to new powers, the rewriting of maps, encyclopedias, historical texts. And here's the truly bizarre part. The coordination of this narrative across competing empires, Russian, British, French, American, Chinese, all agreeing on the same basic story. Tartary was never a real civilization, just a vague geographic term, nothing important, nothing worth investigating. The silence is deafening. No academic archaeological interest in excavating Tartarian sites, no linguistic analysis of potentially surviving languages, no genetic studies examining population continuity or discontinuity. Instead, there's immediate, total, global consensus that Tartaria was never significant. This raises an obvious question: why? Why would competing empires, often at war with each other, agree to erase a civilization from history? What possible benefit does this serve? What are they concealing? Unless the truth is worse than we're imagining, let's reconsider the dark day with everything we now know. The official explanation, forest fires, serves a very specific function. It provides a natural, localized, non-threatening answer to an atmospheric phenomenon that terrified an entire region. It requires no further investigation. It implies no larger pattern. It's comfortable, it's safe, it's contained. But the evidence points towards something much larger, something that conventional history refuses to acknowledge. Contemporary accounts describe the darkness as fundamentally unnatural. They describe the air as having a peculiar quality that defied normal experience. Multiple witnesses reported sounds, deep rumbling, distant thunder without any storm present. Animals displayed behavior beyond simple response to unexpected darkness. Their reactions suggested primal fear, instinctual recognition that something was profoundly wrong. What would a collapsing civilization look like from an atmospheric perspective? Cities burning simultaneously across vast distances, infrastructure being demolished or destroyed, perhaps weaponry whose existence we're not supposed to acknowledge for that time period. The atmospheric signature would be massive, prolonged, visible across continents if the civilization was extensive enough. And what better way to conceal that signature than attributing it to natural causes? Fires, volcanoes, unusual weather, all unpredictable, all mundane, all requiring no investigation into human causation, no uncomfortable questions about what actually happened. The dark day wasn't evidence of Tartaria's existence. It was evidence of Tartaria's annihilation. And the atmospheric explanations, the smoke, the fog, the natural disasters, aren't wrong exactly. They're incomplete. Partial truths carefully arranged to obscure the complete picture. Yes, there was atmospheric disturbance, but not from random natural causes, from coordinated destruction on a scale we're told wasn't possible in 1780. Can I prove this? Not definitively. The evidence is circumstantial, fragmented, and in many cases, seemingly suppressed. Official history has convenient answers for everything, even when those answers require us to accept impossible coincidences and miraculous construction timelines that defy physics and logistics. But I can ask questions, and these questions deserve answers. Why did Tartaria disappear from maps so abruptly without any documented transition period? Where did the population go? Why is there zero archaeological interest in answering these fundamental questions? Why do buildings from San Francisco to St. Petersburg share identical architectural DNA despite supposedly being built by different cultures with minimal communication? Why are construction photographs so rare for structures supposedly built in the photographic age? Why do the few photographs that exist often contradict official construction timelines? Why did atmospheric phenomena cluster so dramatically in the 1780s? Why was the response to the Dark Day, an event that terrified hundreds of thousands of people, so muted, so quickly dismissed, so thoroughly buried in historical records? Why does official history insist on natural explanations that require coincidence after coincidence after coincidence? And why, this is the question that truly haunts me, why is there such fierce resistance to investigating these questions, such immediate hostility toward anyone suggesting our official timeline might be incomplete? The deeper I investigate, the more the official narrative resembles a construction itself, not exactly a lie, but a careful arrangement of partial truths, designed to satisfy curiosity without revealing the full picture. The Dark Day happened. That's documented in hundreds of primary sources. Tartaria appears on maps for centuries, then vanishes within decades. That's verifiable in any major map collection. Global architecture shares impossible uniformity. That's photographed, measured, standing right in front of us in cities worldwide. What's not documented is the connection, the why, the how, the what actually happened. And maybe that omission is intentional. I started this investigation trying to explain why the sky went black on a spring day in 1780. What I found was evidence of a dark century, a period when something ended and something else began, when cities changed hands, when history was rewritten, when questions stopped being asked and started being dismissed. Was Tartaria a unified empire, a loose confederation, a technologically advanced civilization, a cultural sphere? I don't know. The evidence has been too thoroughly scrubbed from official records. Did it collapse in the 1780s? Did the Dark Day mark its final hours? Did atmospheric catastrophe erase a civilization while European empires quietly divided the spoils? Maybe. The timeline fits, the silence fits, the inheritance fits, or maybe I'm seeing patterns where none exist. Maybe forest fires really did darken the sky. Maybe rapid construction really was possible with 18th century technology. Maybe Tartaria really was just a vague geographic term with no real significance. Maybe. But I can't shake the feeling that we're living in inherited cities, walking through buildings we didn't build, following maps redrawn to hide older borders, older names, older truths. And I can't stop wondering what knowledge was lost. What technology? What understanding of the world? The architecture remains. Stone doesn't lie. Classical facades, impossible domes, global coordination in design and execution. It's all still standing, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The Dark Day was May 19th, 1780. The sky went black, and when it cleared, a civilization was gone. If you know what I'm talking about, if you've seen these buildings in your own city, if you've noticed these patterns, if you've felt that something is wrong with the official timeline, you're not alone. Leave a comment, share your city's architectural anomalies. This investigation is just beginning, because somewhere in the smoke and silence there's a truth we weren't supposed to find. And truth doesn't stay buried forever, it just waits for the right questions. What are we not being told about 1780? What really happened to Tartaria, and who benefits from our forgetting?